is that feeling that I have? It is something I have not felt for at least the last year. Is that hope we feel? A little bit of hope is creeping in after last Tuesday, and we are going to break down everything that we saw, everything that we heard, and we're going to talk about why did it happen, what's next, and lessons learned for Democrats moving forward as we go into 2026, and returning to Burn the Talking Points. The most viewed episode until Jamie Raskin took the crown. Sorry, Tom. Is the data guru, the election analyst, and the most important title, Marylander, Tom Bonier from Target Smart, is joining us to break down everything that we know that happened on Tuesday. And we are recording this on Thursday. So while we have a lot of data, it's not 100% complete data. So we are going to break down what we know, what we've seen, and where we go from here. So, Tom, thank you so much for coming back and joining us on Burn the Talking Points.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
So I'm going to do one quick plug before we hop right into it. If you liked what you saw on Tuesday and you saw all of those red seats flip, now is the time for you to run for office if you are sitting in a red seat. Now, run for office no matter where you're sitting, but if you are in a red seat, now is the time to add your name to the ballot. And Maryland Dems are here to help. If you just go to mddems.org/run, you can sign up to talk to your local central committee who's helping recruit for local seats that are red to blue seats, or go to contesteveryseatmd.com, and we have step-by-step how do you run for office here in Maryland and a lot of things to support you. So, folks, if you're in a red seat, there is not a better time to run and get your name on the ballot than right now. So, Tom, let's hop into it. How are you feeling after Tuesday?
I feel great. You know, I like you said. I mean, the last year has been hard. There hasn't been much of a source for hope, and so, you know, look. Obviously, the election results don't cure all the ills that we are facing. Not even close. But just like you, I'm feeling hope again, which is the first time I've been able to feel that in a while.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of videos and I've shared quite a few in my friend group and with my wife of like hope scrolling. I've been doom scrolling for the last year, and the amount of hope scroll videos, I'm like, send.
Like everything.
Yeah. It feels good to at least have that 24 hours, 48 hours of like, okay, I see a path forward now. Again, Trump and Republican administration, Congress are doing everything they can to destroy this country. But for the first time, I feel that path forward. So when we're talking about Tuesday, what were the marquee races that you were watching to help kind of understand both the trends of the night, but then also what might lead into 2026?
Yeah, well, there were the four big ones that everyone was paying attention to in terms of New Jersey, Virginia, New York City, California. You know, the redistricting proposal in California, in New York City, the mayoral election, New Jersey, obviously the gubernatorial, and then in Virginia, the gubernatorial, but then also the other state constitutional offices. You know, those were the big ones. We at Target Smart were working on some of these down ballot races. So we were working on state legislative races in New Jersey. We did work with the Georgia Democratic Party on the public service commissioner races, which were, you know, I don't want to say a surprise because, you know, doing the work there, we were confident that we could win. But those were, you know, basically the same ones that probably everyone was watching. But, you know, to me, like the fun thing about elections like this one, because we don't get a lot of them, is, you know, here we are a couple days later, and there are still things where we'll look at it and say, oh, gosh, we won that. You know, these down ballot races, a lot of them in you know, school board races in Pennsylvania, wiping out the Republican school board members in the important swing county of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So it's things like that I got to be honest, I wasn't watching or paying attention to, and now those are coming onto the radar too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, we need to have more election nights like this because the amount of just, oh, here's a race I wasn't paying attention to that we won. I mean, so we got Spanberger by 15, Mikey Sherrill by 13. Can we talk a little bit about that New Jersey result? The fact that she won by 13, I think the last poll going into election night was Atlas Intel, who was A+ rated. I doubt they're A+ rated anymore. But they had it at a 1-point race and actually had Jack Ciattarelli winning black voters in their poll by, I think, 20. Obviously, that did not happen, and any one poll isn't the indicator, but I think everyone had that race tightening to the end. What did
Yeah,
you
well,
see in that?
New Jersey is one of those states where if you looked at the last few elections, whatever you look at the last gubernatorial 4 years ago where Jack Ciattarelli ran against Phil Murphy, and he made that race a lot closer than anyone, I think, realistically thought it was going to be.
It ended at like a 3-point race, right?
Yes. Yeah. The presidential race in 2024 was closer than it had been in a very long time. And so it's a state where you've been seeing this trend towards Republicans. So I think Republicans had some realistic hopes that they could pull off a surprise there. I don't think you would have found many people who would have bet on a double-digit Democratic victory there because, again, I think people looked at the Virginia gubernatorial election and they said Republicans didn't get the best candidate. And so people might look at that and say, sure, 16 points, but not running against a great candidate. Well, 16 points, it was actually, I think the widest margin for a Democratic gubernatorial candidate in Virginia since, I think, 1961. So still pretty impressive. But in New Jersey, obviously, Ciattarelli is, again, a good quality candidate who ran a very close election. Generally, the track record for candidates who come close one time is the next time, especially when it's an open election the next time, they're going to do better. So I think there was a realistic expectation for Republicans to do a lot better. Like you said, the polling kept showing that race getting tighter and tighter. And in the end, gosh, it wasn't close at all. The race was called very soon after polls closed there. You didn't have to see many results before you looked at it and said, okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you're known for is like diving a layer deeper on some of the data and finding some things that maybe either others don't see or maybe we're not paying attention to right away. So I definitely want to hear your take on like what are some of the things maybe across the board or in individual races you're noticing that either we should be excited about or things that like, hey, under the surface, we still have some warning signs that we want to be looking at. But like a few, I think, everything was moving left. It was great.
Yeah, one of the things that the New York Times does well with their political coverage and their data visualization is they have these maps I think we've all gotten used to now, where they have the arrows, the blue or red arrows, going one direction or the other, basically showing how counties and municipalities have swung between elections. In this case, they were comparing the elections from this week to the 2024 elections. You look at that Virginia map, and you just see a pretty universal swing towards Democrats. Even if you look at the attorney general's race, which that was a race that Republicans really thought they were going to win. The polling, again, showed them in good shape there. And not only did Republicans not win, I think Democrat won by, 5 or 6 points. So
I think they beat Harris's margin, too.
Yes. Yeah. So not particularly close in the end. And even there, you saw this big swing towards Democrats. But to your point, I think the encouraging thing is in some of these other elections where you've seen Democrats overperform, some of the 2022 Senate and gubernatorial races, certainly 2018, there were still bigger warning signs where these rural communities were still swinging away from Democrats, even while Democrats were doing well elsewhere. And here you see this movement back, where if we're talking about, and you and I talked about this in our first conversation, just some of these troubling areas for Democrats, losing ground among younger voters, especially younger men, losing ground among voters of color. If you believe the exit polls, and I think the exit polls are generally just going to give us a good general sense of where things stand, not exactly precise, but it's close enough for this level of analysis, you see that you had this huge swing back, not just from a geographical perspective, but demographically, younger voters, Latino voters, AAPI voters, Asian American voters, all swung back and gave the Democratic candidates wherever you're talking about. Again, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, the California redistricting initiative, those voters all swung back. Now, again, it's not something I think we can look at and say, well, done deal. They're all back in our camp and we have them forever. But it's certainly a good sign going into the midterms next year.
I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it underscores like the openness that people will have to vote Democratic again. I think after 24, the conversation, and yeah, you and I had this, is like, is that shut off for the next generation. Is this a political realignment that is just, it is what it is, and we have to find a new path to 50 plus one? And I think what this is showing is, our base voters are still base voters, but the people that we need to persuade are persuadable. There is inroads to be made with some of these groups that swung towards Trump. And I think, you mentioned New York City with now Mayor-elect Mamdani. I think one of the things that really encapsulated the conversation that we're having here and kind of bookends it is his initial video where he was standing on that street corner saying, like, talk to me about politics. And there's a lot of people you would expect to be Democratic voters saying, I voted for Trump. I don't like what's going on. I don't want to talk about this. And then fast forward a year, he went and stood back on that same street corner, and the excitement that was generated, the amount of energy that people wanted to vote for a Democrat, like it campaigns matter. I think this just underscores this idea that it's not, demographics aren't destiny, elections aren't destiny, like campaigns still matter. And I'd be curious if you are in that camp as well, or if you're in the, the datas of the data.
Yeah, no, 100% that camp. And I think when you look at the campaign craft, right, the work that was done in that race, but also in these races in New Jersey and Virginia, these were all excellent campaigns with excellent messaging, excellent communication. And, again, that's why I think we should take heart in this. It's because not everything going into election night was rosy for Democrats. We knew that even while Trump and the Republican favorability and popularity numbers were low, so was the popularity and favorability of the Democratic Party. It wasn't like they were loving us. They just weren't liking them. And so generally you'd see, if we go back to like 2017, the last time we had an odd year election in Trump's first term, there was some of that dynamic. Trump was already unpopular. Democrats weren't super popular. And so Democrats won, again, key races in that case, but you had lower turnout. You didn't have that level of intensity and enthusiasm. It was more like, sure, I'm going to vote against those folks, but I'm not super excited to vote for y'all. Well, you mentioned that in terms of New York City, it was the highest turnout in a mayoral election since 1969. This wasn't just Republicans staying home and in the hardcore, true blue, older Democrats coming out. In fact, the generational gap in New York City was shocking, where Mamdani was winning, voters under the age of 30 by I want to say 60 points, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe even a little bit bigger than that. So he was actually pointing out new voters, people who hadn't voted before. And we'll get the full vote history soon, and we'll be able to look at all that. But when you just look at the early vote there, a whole bunch of people who voted early didn't vote at all in 2024.
Yeah.
So that's, certainly a good sign. And again, you saw some of that in New Jersey. New Jersey turnout increased just in terms of raw number of votes cast as of yesterday. And like you said, the votes are still being counted. And some of these cases, there'll still be some more to come in. But turnout increased 23% over 4 years ago in that last governor's election. That's a really high increase. You generally don't see that. For 23% more votes cast. Yeah, that's not just because, look, the Republican narrative on this is generally, well, these elections, they aren't really meaningful. We don't have to change course because it's just, the Democratic Party is now the party of the high propensity elites, well-educated, not the working class. You look at exit polls, Democrats won among voters making under $25,000 a year, under $50,000 a year, under $100,000 a year. They were winning with working class voters and actually getting really high turnout. So that old narrative from Republicans where they've been able to excuse this away, it doesn't hold up in the data we're seeing at this point.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying a lot of the Republican cope over the last 48 hours, and we'll talk about some of that. Just to hit on what you said in New Jersey, for instance, like Jack Ciattarelli beat the raw amount of votes he got in 2021 when he lost to Phil Murphy by 3%. If Jack Ciattarelli would have got the amount of votes he got this time in 2021, he would have been governor. Mikey Sherrill just completely blew it out of the water. So this Republican cope of, we're like, our voters, really love Donald Trump, they'll show up for him, etc. And, it's low propensity, whatever, like, isn't true. Like, Republicans did show up at higher rates than they have in the past. we just won more through persuasion and our base turned out more. So it wasn't just base turnout, but it was base plus persuasion. Unless maybe my read on it's wrong, but be curious, is that how you're seeing it too?
Yeah, 100%. And that for me, another thing that I think we can carry forward from here and feel good about is, let's keep in mind that we had primary elections in these states and in these races, very robust primaries. New York City mayoral was a very competitive primary. The New Jersey
Yeah.
gubernatorial primary, you had a lot of great, well-qualified candidates running, competitive primaries. And I know, oftentimes we'll look at it and we'll say, well, we just want a clear field. We want someone to go in and not have to spend the resources. But I think in the moment we were in, it was a good thing because it was a lot of good candidates talking about ideas and policies and just what makes us Democrats.
Yeah.
And talking about issues that people actually care about. And in the end, I think all of our candidates in these key races came out of these primaries stronger for it. And
Yeah.
in all the cases, there weren't those types of scars with, let's give the exception of Andrew Cuomo deciding to lose the primary and then run in the general election. Obviously, that didn't go well for him. But again, I think, it to your point, that was a big part of it too, I think, is that it did make sure that the Democratic base was engaged. They were there, but there was also this, almost year-long campaign that actually brought in independents, where you see that in exit polls everywhere. The Democratic candidates overwhelmingly won among independent voters while getting great base turnout.
Yeah, which I think is really important as we look going forward in Maryland, in a ton of states, is independent voters are going to be critical to any coalitions we form going forward. I mean, in Virginia, they don't have party registration, but, Abigail Spanberger obviously did well with independents or non-party affiliated folks. Here in Maryland, the fastest growing group is no party affiliation. Part of it, there's some intricacies around motor voter and things like that, but no party affiliation is growing rapidly across the nation. So it's going to be really important that we have, robust primaries that can then also bring in independents as we move into the general election. And I do want to make one, as we move into like, why did it happen? One of the things I do want to point out is almost every single Trump endorsed candidate lost. And I don't know if any won, so I can't make that declarative statement, but yeah, Jack Ciattarelli lost. He says he didn't endorse Earl Sears in Virginia, but he did teletown halls. Like the RGA gave $4 million. Like he was there. The attorney general in Virginia lost. Andrew Cuomo lost. Prop 51. Like Donald Trump was a drag on the ticket. So let's talk like, why did it happen? And just big picture in your mind, why did we see the results we saw?
Yeah. Well, look, the most simple way that I can put it, if you think of the arc, and we don't have to go back very far, but we talked about this again in our last conversation. Obviously, inflation played a huge role in Trump's win. And I think Democrats failed to disqualify him based on sort of everything else. We normalized them. That's in the past now. But they ran saying to American voters, we're going to make your lives better. We're going to make things less expensive. We're going to improve the economy for you. And then they went in and not only did they not only were they distracted by all the culture war BS and all of the awful things they have been doing to people in terms of what ICE has been doing and just, wherever you look, acting in awful ways, they then actively worked to make the economy worse for people with the tariffs, with the DOGE cuts, cutting funding for incredibly important government programs. They did everything they could to make things worse. And then so should we be shocked at all that the first time Republicans have to face the voters since all of this has happened, the voters say, no, thank you. And you look at the exit polls, they had a really interesting question where they asked, and I don't remember the exact question, but basically, how are you feeling about the state of the country? And it wasn't the usual, like, right track, wrong track. It was saying, on one hand, that you feel like things are going great, all the way to, there were 4 different levels. And the end of it was angry. I'm feeling angry. And in both New Jersey and Virginia, where they asked that question, the exit polls, the most common answer, the most popular answer was angry. And that's not really a shocker. It was like 36, 38%. And then another 20-ish% they were saying, like, I'm not feeling good about how things are going, right? A majority of voters in those states didn't feel good about how things were going. But that intensity of people saying, over a third of voters saying flat out, no, I'm angry. And again, we shouldn't be surprised to hear the Democratic candidates won over 90% of the vote from those voters.
I mean,
So
that makes sense.
they're mad. People are mad because Republicans and Donald Trump promised them something. He did the other thing, not just a little bit. He did it aggressively. And so the Republicans on the ballot had to pay the price for what Donald Trump and Republicans in Washington and Republicans in these states have done or failed to do.
Yeah. I mean, that is we're doing what we're calling the talkback tour, and we're going county by county, and the chair is listening to voters in all 24 counties. We've now done 21. And we start every single one with a word cloud activity where people literally text in how they feel about the state of the country. And anger is a very, very large word on all of those word clouds. Again, we're talking to base voters here. But we had one yesterday in Carroll County, so after the election, and it was the first time a positive word ended up on the word cloud. We had done 20 previously and not one single positive word. Yesterday, there were not a ton of positive words, but you were starting to see the energy go through. So that makes total sense with some of those exit polls. So as you look at these results, how do you think these results, or what do you think these results should tell us about the environment going into 2026? Should we buy the Republican cope that it's off year elections? I believe I saw one GOP operative text that was like, this feels very participation trophy-esque. And should blue states take it differently than swing states? Should incumbents think about it differently? Is it just an anti-incumbent environment? I don't know. How are you interpreting these results for 2026?
Yeah, I think obviously the results of one election don't guarantee anything for the subsequent election.
I wish they did for this one, at least.
If only they did, we could take the next year off. But you couldn't ask for better signs. And really, for this to turn around, it's going to take Donald Trump and Republicans doing something that I don't think they are capable of doing, which is admitting they were wrong and changing course dramatically. And in fact, early signs we're seeing is that they're doing the opposite.
I mean, I've been reliably told that Donald Trump can focus on a sustained, aggressive campaign of lowering costs and will not get distracted by anything. So,
right. Of course, just like he was going to focus on infrastructure in his first term.
Exactly. I mean, I will say he's really focused on that ballroom. He has been able to focus pretty much on building a $300 million ballroom from corporate donors.
He's very proud of it. And the timing, frankly, couldn't have been better to do that in a couple of weeks right before these elections. And so I think, again, if these elections were lower turnout, if these weren't, elections where we're seeing the highest turnout in decades, if we weren't seeing lots of new voters coming in, if we weren't seeing these massive swings, then I think you could look at it and say, okay, well, that was nice, but kind of like these special election victories, big caveat there, big asterisks, and that the actual electorate will be bigger. Well, when you look at the turnout in these elections, there's actually no reason to believe that the turnout will be any higher in the midterm election than what we saw in these. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. It could. But if it does happen, that'll actually be probably even worse for Republicans because it means you have more of this intensity against them. And so it's not like there's this hidden set of voters who just love what the Republicans are doing, but they're staying home until something magical happens that pulls them out. So, I think this is
I think
and it's all good signs at this point. There aren't, you mentioned to this in the introduction in terms of what are the weak spots that we need to look at. And I think, we generally covered this in terms of the areas that were the weak spots. We can't just assume that one election fixes them all.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to take something. It's going to take the Republicans doing something dramatically different to turn that around. And I think, perhaps most encouraging, because again, when you ask people how they feel about the Democratic Party as an institution, the popularity numbers are still low. But that's really a meaningless question to so many people. That's not something they engage with. They engage with the candidates.
Mhm.
They engage with the ideas, and the candidates and the ideas in the Democratic Party are popular. Right now, there just aren't institutions. If you ask someone about an institution, for the most part, there isn't going to be that favorability there. But the good news is that people who still said, yeah, I don't know that I feel great about the Democratic Party as an entity, still voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic candidates.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting. You started this in your answer, but I think Lisa McClain, I think she's conference chair of the Republicans, said this morning on TV that Republicans are just so happy with, or Republican voters are just so happy with what's happening that they just didn't feel the need to come out. I think she said that to Jake Tapper. I would love that to be the case. That just feels like that doesn't even feel like good cope. I mean, I know what I would be saying if I was on the other side, and that's not something I would be saying. It just like where is something just not connecting for them? And you said on Twitter, like, good to know that the GOP will, as usual, learn the wrong lessons from this election. What lessons do you think they're going to take from it, which are wrong? And I mean, I hesitate to ask you because I don't want them to then change.
If only I could change them. If only I had that power.
I mean, I'm sure they're all tuned in to burn the talking points. They're just waiting for this episode to drop.
Exactly. It'll give them all the answers if they'd only listen. And I will say it's always hard with these post election takes to separate like how much of this is them trying to like spin
Mm-hmm.
because Republicans are very adept at this framework of strength versus weakness, right? I think they actually understand it better than we as Democrats do. That being perceived as strong and as winning is generally going to be helpful, especially in winning over independent voters. It's something that Trump has been very good at, right? Give a sense of momentum. People want to be with the winners.
Yep.
They want to be part of something that feels like they're on the right side. And
which is also why I pull my hair out every time I see a Democratic fundraising email or text that says like, we're losing. I'm like it.
Well, and can I say credit where credit's due is we saw some of this from our gubernatorial candidates early on, and there was a bit of an effort to try to reel that back in, and I think they did a better job on the home stretch where they would, because and again we've talked about this, but what works to raise money doesn't always work from a messaging perspective, and more campaigns need to recognize that. And I think our campaigns ended up doing a better job of that down the stretch. So it's hard to tell what is spin from Republicans, or are they being honest with themselves behind closed doors? But when I say that they're taking all the wrong lessons, that was specifically in reaction to reports from the day after the election where Trump met with the Republican Senate caucus, and he talked about he got one part of this right. He said the shutdown's really hurting us. He's right. The shutdown, I think, is hurting Republicans, as it should. But then he said, well, so what we need to do is nuke the filibuster and just push through our agenda. Well, obviously their agenda is even less popular than the shutdown. And so to me, that's them taking the wrong lessons from this. It's saying all we've got to do is just push through, unilaterally enact. That's what they've been doing all this time. It's why they're in this position. The executive orders, the authoritarianism, ignoring court orders, that sort of thing. And so the idea that they look at this and they say, oh no, we need to do more of this. If that's where they go, they'll be wiped out at a level I don't think we've seen before in last year's elections.
When Trump said that, I was like, no, please don't nuke the filibuster. I mean, there's been a really interesting, compelling debate. I will say there's a Twitter thread by Josh Holmes, who is a former McConnell guy, who I think laid it out and may not have intentionally laid it out this way, but Democrats really engaged with this conversation where like the Republican agenda is actually not about doing things and fixing things and passing legislation. And so the filibuster is there to their advantage, where like the Democratic agenda actually requires building and new legislation and fixing. And the filibuster is an impediment to that. And so, If Republicans want to nuke the filibuster, please don't do it. No, we can't have that.
Well, it's like Mike Johnson yesterday said that the Republican Congress it will go down history as one of the, most effective and accomplished Congresses. And I'm thinking, like, how have they passed anything?
I mean, we all, you know, have our dreams, I guess, and Mike Johnson's one of them. He's got a little bit of time left to make it effective. We'll see what happens.
They will have to come back to Washington at some point to actually accomplish.
They've been the most effective at abdicating any sort of oversight role. They've been remarkable at that. Let's talk a little bit about lessons you think Democrats should take from this. We talked a little bit at top, but if there's a core lesson you want Democrats to walk away from this election with, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if you look at the arc of this election and the arc of this year, which when I think back feels like the arc of many years, but when Trump took office, and obviously he was very quick to bring in Project 2025 and execute that plan, as we knew he would. I think we as Democrats in a lot of instances were caught somewhat flat-footed, where we didn't know what to do. And there was one side that said, well, don't take the bait. Don't engage on these awful things. Just talk about the economy. It's all a distraction. And there were others who said, no, we have to. This is too awful. And again, another really interesting exit poll question to me was around, they framed it as Trump's immigration policy and enforcement. And there were three options. Do you think it's gone too far? Do you think it's not gone far enough? Or do you think it's just about right? Now, thankfully, in Virginia and New Jersey, where they asked that question, a majority of voters said it's gone too far, 53 and 56%, respectively. And among those, the Democratic candidates won over 90% of those voters. And then among the other two options, the people who said, no, it's okay how it is, or no, I think it should go farther, the Republican candidates won 90% of those voters. And I think back, and again, I want to give Senator Chris Van Hollen credit here as being someone who was early on this, when he went to Central America and went to that prison. And there were people in the Democratic family who said, oh, we shouldn't be doing that. Don't draw attention to the issue. It's going to make us look weak on crime, weak on immigration. And, I'm not saying he single-handedly turned the tide on this. But to me, to get back to your question, what's the lesson? The lesson is we as Democrats need to be fearless and engaging in pushing back on Republicans. And that's, in the end, all that voters want to see. They want to see that we are fighting for them, not just on issues like that, but on the cost of living, on the state of the economy in general, on job opportunities, and yes, and all these awful authoritarian things. And you saw our candidates, all in their own way, had really effective messaging in my mind on this issue, where they talked about, patriotism and opportunity and, really folding this up into a coherent strategy and message. And so for me as a message going forward, this isn't to me about being more progressive or more moderate. It's about being fighters. It's about being fearless and making it clear to voters that you are there for them and you are fighting for them. And also as a lesson, a takeaway, I was asked this question in an interview. I talked to Times Radio, which is the British right-leaning news outlet, the day after the election. And they were already pushing this Mamdani is the face of the party or the leader of the Democratic Party thing. And they asked me that question. It's such a stupid question. And the reality is, and the easy answer there is, when you look at what happened and you look who won, they're all the face of the party, right? They are all the face of the party. And what Democrats actually did and how we succeeded in winning all these races reminds me of 2006. Where we had this period after losing the 2000 presidential election with Al Gore, where we were a little bit in the wilderness. And then we did bad in 2002 again, bad into 2004 election. We were wandering. And then 2006 said, look, we're going to run the right candidates for the right districts. We're going to go out there with an agenda and we're going to make it clear that we're fighting for you. We took back the House. We set the groundwork for the 2008 presidential election. That's what it feels like to me. And the fact that you can elect someone like Mamdani in New York City, who was the right guy for New York City, but also elect our great candidates in New Jersey with Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. That's what we need to do. And so that's a big takeaway for me is get these candidates who are unafraid to fight and who will make it clear that they're going to stand up for their people.
Yeah, and I think the conversation around being a big tent party and how we do that post 24 and online fighting, and there needs to be room for everyone, and the right candidate in the right district has to be able to run as the Democrat and make the conversation that fits that district, which is,
Right.
we're making a lot of really great choices. We're making a lot of some stupid choices as a party, which we always do. But on the whole, it seems like we're moving in the right direction on a lot of that. And I think I know where you're going to be on this answer here. But the other debate is putting forward an affirmative, positive vision of like, here's what I'm going to do versus running like a negative partisanship against Trump. Candidates did both, but where do you stand on this debate, or what does the data tell you for this debate?
Yeah, like on one hand, I am biased from the 2024 experience where we didn't do enough of disqualifying Trump.
Yeah.
But if we believe the answer is to just run against Trump, we're missing out on a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Meaning, I think it's relatively safe to say that going into next year's elections, Trump will still be wildly unpopular. And so just that by itself will afford Democrats great opportunities where Democrats will win a lot of races just because the Republicans are so unpopular. But if you can imagine how well we will do if people are not only voting against Trump and the Republicans to stop them, but they're voting proactively for Democrats because they believe Democrats will make their lives better. I do think that's what you saw and why the results were just so good for Democrats is because they did run good campaigns where they had that positive messaging, but also Trump was a part of it. And so I think we got to do both. We have to do both. And realistically, like the Trump part is going to be present, right? Like people feel the way they feel. At this point, we don't have to be as aggressive with the negative partisanship as maybe we needed to be and we failed to be a year ago.
Yeah.
But it still has to be part of it and connecting the dots that we're going to stop this.
Yeah. Let's talk Maryland quick here before we end with a quick who would you rather be, us versus them conversation. So with the results from across the country, we did have elections here in Maryland for some cities, Frederick City, Annapolis, a few other cities where we did well. We just got the news that we went 9 for 9 in Annapolis. They're literally counting Frederick as we speak, but I'm confident we will sweep there as well. Is there a lesson for a deep blue state like Maryland to learn? Because, we're not Virginia. We're not, New Jersey. We didn't swing back to Trump in the same way that New Jersey did. We did move left, but it wasn't a 5-point race. So is there anything for us to learn, or do we just keep moving forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's some lessons there just in terms of the different pieces of the equation, like you say, that moved some of these other states towards Trump in 2024. Maryland has some of those pieces of the equation. It's just it's a Democratic enough of a state that it was never going to be in play. But there are those elements, and so I think to the extent you talk about like Latino voters, there has been Trump did better with Latino voters in Maryland as well, and so I think there are great opportunities for our candidates to go out and engage and bring those voters back as they did in these other states. Younger voters, I think there's a great opportunity in Maryland going into next year in these midterms to bring more of these younger voters out who maybe wouldn't otherwise come out in the midterm election because they are feeling this mix of excitement, intensity, and anger, frankly. And then, what you said at the beginning of this conversation, and let me emphasize that as a Marylander, it'll be a great opportunity for people who want to get involved. There's no better time than right now to go out there and run. And if you see a district and you think, I don't know that we could win it, get involved, because there will be, we saw this week in the elections. We will see it next year. It's what happens in these types of potential wave elections. is there are surprises. There are districts that were never in reach before that suddenly become in reach. And so I think for a lesson for Maryland is, and I know it's what y'all do and y'all do so well at the Maryland Democratic Party, but like, let's run everywhere.
Yeah, for sure. And fingers crossed that's what we get. We have some actually really great candidates up by where you live. A couple have filed, and I think we're going to hopefully get a full slate for the first time in maybe ever, and really push some great candidates across the finish line because they'll run campaigns that make sense for their community. Um, Before we move into the game, are there any data points or questions that you're like, hey, the audience should know about this as you're going through things and going through results that you're like, hey, let me break some news?
I think we covered it well. If I can just be petty for a moment,
Jeez.
I do think it's like the polling. You mentioned Atlas Intel. And I think I had a very healthy approach to polling this year, which is I really didn't pay that much attention to it. But Atlas Intel, if you Google them, you would find all these news stories where it then has, like, as if it's contractually obligated, in quotes, the most accurate pollster, because they were closest in 2024. They're from Brazil. They have some weird methodology. You mentioned some of the weird results they produce. But the polling had a pretty strong Republican bias in general this year. And so I just want to plant that seed for folks because we're going to see a lot more polling over the next year about what is possible and what isn't possible in the midterm elections. And we just want to bear that in mind. And I encourage everyone to bear that in mind is the polling is getting harder and harder. And there is more of a systemic, actually right-wing bias in a lot of these polls. And I'm not saying this is some great plot, but there's just various reasons for it. And so, it's something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention with these election results, but it is worth, even where the polls were right and they said, yeah, we're going to win in Virginia, we're going to win in New Jersey. None of them captured the magnitude of this. So there are big misses. People don't pay attention as much if they miss, but they still got the right winner. But that's as important. And so, and yeah, goodbye to Atlas Intel. I hope we don't pay attention to them anymore because, I say it's not bad intentions. I'm not sure it's not bad intentions.
I mean, it's like when the Real Clear Politics average has 4 Trafalgars in there and an Atlas, and it happens to then switch a media narrative to Republican surge, which media narratives help drive votes.
Well, it gets back to, what we were talking about in terms of this narrative of strength versus weakness, right?
Yeah.
It's momentum versus stagnation.
Yeah.
Republicans understand that. And this poll-driven narrative, to your point, can be very helpful to campaigns because if you're Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey in the weekend before Election Day, what we call GOTV weekend, where you're trying to build the intensity, enthusiasm, get people out knocking doors, if the political press is saying, ooh, Mikey Sherrill might be fumbling it, she might be dropping the ball, well, then that sense of momentum can go away. And for these lower information voters who aren't paying super close attention, maybe they think, yeah, I'm not even going to bother to go out.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind it. And so it is important to pay attention to these things, call them out when it's out there.
I think it goes a little bit to, there was a poll question in New Jersey that was asked that was like, who are you voting for? And it was Sherrill +3. And then they asked, who do you think your neighbors are voting for? And it was Chitterelli +6.
Yeah, there you
go. It was in a media environment where he appeared to be surging. Now he
felt like he was the candidate with momentum. Yeah. And that's gold for a candidate. Yeah. You want to go into Election Day perceived as the one with momentum.
Yeah. And I again, not going down too big of a conspiracy theory hole, but I feel like seen this enough, and I'm not going to be loosey with the football and not think that there's some nefarious, Republican pollsters that will jam things in the last 4 weeks to create a narrative momentum, because there's nothing the political press likes more than a story about a comeback. Because Mikey Sherrill +13, not that interesting of a story. Mikey Sherrill +1, very interesting story.
Absolutely.
So let's do a quick, we'll call it Tom Bonier bursts our bubble, because we're going to ask you a couple of different races, and I'm going to have you say, would you rather be us or would you rather be them? And you can even qualify if you want. You can say them but barely, or us for sure. A couple of marquee races where we're trying to expand the map, or we know it's going to be a big race. I'm going to say it. You tell me, would you rather be us? Would you rather be them? Feel free to explain why, or feel free to just to zip it and pretend that you didn't say what you said. let's start with the easiest one first, in my opinion. Maryland governor. Would you rather be in our seat or their seat?
Yeah, no, I'd rather be us.
I agree. I think Westmore will run an incredibly good campaign and will be in a very strong position with his record. Um, let's go to another easy one, and then we're going to get harder. Florida governor.
Yeah, Florida is tough. Florida is tough. I will say, and look, I'm going to say about this whole game in general is if you asked me this last week, I'd have very different answers. You got me right in the middle. I'm riding high on a blue wave.
That's why I wanted to play this one. Yeah.
So don't sleep on Florida. Don't sleep on it.
I agree. I am really nervous about those voter registration numbers down there. They keep registering more.
The trends are not great. The trends are not great. Watch the Miami runoff. By the way, there's a mayoral election. Well, the runoff coming up next month there, and Democrats actually look like we're in a good position to pick that up. So that could make things a little bit more spicy there.
All right, let me change the scale then, because I'm with you. I think all of these are within reach. So let's do an excitement meter,
Okay.
1 to 5. You're excited for all of them. 5 is like I'm gonna run through a wall to watch this race.
Perfect.
Let's do Wisconsin governor with Tony Evers stepping down, so it's an open seat.
Yeah, I'd put that as a 3 or 4 in excitement.
Yeah, I think it's hard to replace a Democratic governor after 2 terms. Mikey Sherrill did it, and
everything is always close in Wisconsin.
It's my home state, and every time
other than the court races.
Exactly. Pennsylvania governor.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I would far rather be us, but I don't see that as especially exciting.
How about Texas Senate?
Gosh, I mean, this is an interesting one because you have you have on one hand, like we as Democrats, Texas and Florida have always been together. Though to your point, the demographic trends are now looking a little bit different. But to me, what's interesting about Texas is Republicans have been sort of banking then what was happening with Latino voters as a trend, not just a sort of one-off. And if what we saw happen this week happens in Texas, where Latino voters sort of come back to Democrats, then not only do you look at like the Senate governor's races there and say these are interesting, but the gerrymander that they put in place, there are 2 seats they create for them. They're Trump plus 10 that they thought these are our seats. At Trump plus 10, with him being a high watermark with Latino voters, these are heavily Latino districts, Democrats could win both those seats. So I'm like, Texas in general, I'm pretty excited to follow what happens over the coming months here.
Let's go Alaska Senate.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fun one because Alaska, obviously a historically very Republican state, but truly just an independent populist state where Democrats have won, with Mary Peltola being a very interesting candidate who's won in the past. If you get the right candidate there, Democrats could win it. It's like there's the handful of states where if Democrats win, we go from thinking that we could actually lose seats in the Senate to, hey, we could actually get 50, maybe 51 seats. Not banking on it. So,
I'll work hard for it, but yeah.
Let's call that a 3.
And so Representative Peltola, if you have any news you want to break, feel free to come on Burn the Talking Points. Anything you want to announce, we're happy to have you do it here. Probably not great for Alaska and the campaign, but we would love to have you. Let's do 2 more. Pennsylvania 7th or Pennsylvania 10th, or any of these swing Pennsylvania seats.
Yeah, I feel good about Pennsylvania. When we are tracking the voter reg in Pennsylvania going down up to the election day, they had the Supreme Court races statewide where the Democratic judges all were retained by very strong margins. Democrat party registration has been a big problem for Democrats in Pennsylvania from 2000 to 2004. And the good news is in the last month, it's actually turned around for the first time. And so let's see if that holds or if that was just a flash. But I am bullish on Democratic opportunities in Pennsylvania at the congressional level, maybe to pull off some upsets.
And let's do the last one. And this is the one that gives me the most anxiety. The House of Representatives, for us to flip it.
Yeah. Well, so the gerrymandering is real, and it's being very it's something that's going to be very hard to do the math on. There were a couple polls that came out over the weekend or earlier this week that had Democrats, I want to say +8 and +7 in the generic ballot. If we're anywhere close to that, I don't care what maps they draw. We're taking the House back. But again, the area where we have to feel a little bit of optimism is if Republicans go too far, like I think they did in Texas.
Yeah.
You can only do so much with map drawing before you get to the point that it is not going to be standing up to a blue wave. But it's going to be tough. I mean, it's not like we can't just expect to win the popular vote and take the House back. It looks like we need to win the popular vote by at least 3 to 4 points, if not more. And we've done it.
Yep.
We've done it. It's just not easy.
Yeah, and part of that is fielding candidates in every seat, even deep red seats, and make people compete at home too.
Yes.
So Tom, appreciate you joining us. I do want to just take what you said and do a final call for folks to sign up to run for office in Maryland in a red seat. We will help you. Go to contesteveryseatmd.com or go to mddems.org/run to set up a meeting with your local central committee. Cannot thank you enough for coming on to both share your perspective, share your data, and share your analysis as one of the folks who is on the front of just democratic data analysis in the country. And we are so glad that you live in Maryland. And I do just want to give a thank you to everyone who volunteered over the last year, whether it was in Maryland, whether you were on the phones calling Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, whether you got on the bus with Jessica Fitzwater and went down to Virginia, whether you flew to California to knock for Prop 50, whether you called or texted your friends and family that lived in a swing state. It doesn't matter how big or small. Well, it does actually. The bigger, the better. But everyone doing things matters. And the collective effort of Democrats in this last year has been really remarkable. It would be really easy to take the punch that we took and just stay down. But the DNC did a great job of organizing and sending opportunities out. The campaigns did a fantastic job. And Marylanders really stepped up. So thank you so much to everyone who did it. And Tom, thank you for joining Burn the Talking Points to share your analysis. Maybe after, hopefully, we have some big sweeps in 2026, you'll come back on and we can do this again and maybe have a beer while we're doing it.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm going to get that most watched crown back.
Yes. I mean, if you have any trash talk you want to say to Jamie Raskin,
honestly, if I'm going to lose to any one person, that's a pretty good person to lose to. No shame in that. But I'm going to come at him on this one.
Give us a into the camera, Jamie Raskin. I'm coming for you.
Jamie Raskin, I'm coming for you.
There you go. All right, Tom. Thank you for joining Burn the Talking Points. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And just so everyone knows, the schedule of release is going to be a little bit different because of all the holidays. So we're going to put a bunch of special episodes out. It'll be the end of season 1, and season 2 will start when the General Assembly session starts as well. So more content coming. It's just going to be at irregular intervals because holidays are great, and we want people to spend time with their families. So thanks again, everyone, and thanks for tuning in.